Good afternoon. We're here to talk about feedback today, giving and receiving feedback. We're going to touch on. So just inviting you to share with us where you're based and why is feedback important to you? So just inviting you to head to the chat and share your thoughts. If you have any specific questions about feedback, then there's a Q&A section which you can find in the same place as your mute button and your video controls and all those kind of things. There's a Q&A button there. So if you post your question early, we're most likely to get around to it. I know the last one of these, Dee, that we did, we still had quite a few questions outstanding.
Yeah, we did.
I owe you a video on that. I've started.
We've got some people already sharing why feedback is important to them.
Fantastic. Michelle's got her hand up. Michelle, I don't know if you want to head to the chat. Is there anything we can help you with? I can unmute you if you like. But usually when I do that at the beginning of these sessions, people say, oh, I put my hand up by mistake.
Yeah. We've got lots of people saying it uncovers weak spots or blind spots, helps me to reflect on what I might not be able to see, important to develop and grow. I like the word grow.
Yes, that's cool. That's really nice.
Course correct as well. We love that. Course correction. Feedback helps me improve. Helps you focus on what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, I really like the comment there about it helps me to reflect on what I might not be aware of, not able to see. Yeah,
Yeah. We all have blind spots, don't we?
absolutely.
Continuous improvement. Lots of really positive words.
Yes, yes, that is good. And people are joining us from all over the world. There's Annie is just in Staines, which is I'm in Staines too. So like, hi to Annie. Denise is in Nicaragua, and we've got lots of people in various places in between. Yeah, but I like Becky's comment there around feedback is helpful for people to see if they're if it's going well or not.
Yeah.
Like, and if not, how to improve. Yeah, some lovely reflections there. Thank you. So those of you just joining us, I can see the numbers are kind of steadily going up. We're just asking where are you based, just because we're nosy, really.
Yeah.
And why is feedback important to you? And we've got some lovely thoughts and reflections in relation to that already, but please do keep them coming.
There's a lovely comment there. It helps us see things as others do rather than how we think they are.
Yes, that is lovely. And really helpful to remember that it might open up a blind spot for us. So if you wanted to head to the Q&A, if you've got a specific question, to get that in early. We often don't get to all of your questions, so we love to see them. We will answer as many as we can in between now and 2:45. And for those that we don't get to answer, we will get some answers out on social media in the next few weeks. So do post your questions there.
Counter's still going up, so people are still joining, but a bit slower now. So I think we can kick off.
Started. Yeah, cool. Fantastic. Thank you. So my name is Hayley Watts. I'm one of the Productivity Ninja team at Think Productive. I get particularly excited about our leadership and management training because I think it's so important. I know certainly in my first couple of management roles, I was pretty much just winging it, and I went on lots of courses and figure out what worked and what didn't work. So often when I'm looking through the material that we deliver, it's like, oh, somebody had told me this at the beginning. Dee, do you want to introduce yourself?
Love to. Thanks, Hayley. My name's Dee, and I work at Think Productive as Head of Learning Success. So I'll be helping out today just by monitoring the chat, making sure your questions get answered and captured. And any kind of tech issues or other questions, you can just change the to my name and just message me directly.
Awesome, fantastic. Thank you, Dee. So it says there, delivering clear and confident insights. I think whenever I'm delivering this training, we do this session as a 3-hour workshop, and you're going to get a very condensed version today. One of the things that people often feel is that they know what feedback needs to be given, but they're not confident in doing that. And that's one of the things that we want to help people with, to do the giving and the receiving of feedback in a really confident and positive way. So do feel free to post your thoughts and your observations in the chat, but if it's a direct question, then please put that in the Q&A section. That just helps us to pick that up, and we will make sure we have plenty of time for answering your questions at the end. We're going to talk about the difference between coaching, feedback, input, and why we might want to give feedback. And I think we've got a group of people today, from your thoughts and your insights in the chat already, who are quite keen on feedback and see the value of that. So that's awesome. But our approach and our intent behind the feedback are key. And that's one of the things that we're going to touch on. So what is feedback? Well, we've got a picture of a rocket. So the word feedback actually comes from NASA. Back in the 50s, when NASA were planning a rocket launch on the moon, the idea of feedback would be that ground control would be able to tell the people in the rocket, where are you at? Are you on trajectory to land on the moon? Do you need to go left a bit or right a bit or up or down a bit? And I'm sure they had more technical language than that, but you get the drift, right? It's about helping to direct that rocket to help it to land in the right place. So we've started to define feedback here as the process of supporting an individual on their path towards maybe maintaining standards or performance, behaviour. Maybe it's about achieving a specific goal or deliverable. It might be about improving on something that's been delivered, a product or a service. So it's less about the person and it's more about the work that's being done. So it's either designed to reinforce, so like, yes, you're on track to land in the right place, or to redirect. You need to go left a bit or you need to go right a bit, with the goal of achieving an agreed outcome. And I think that's very often when I'm delivering workshops, that's the bit where people go, oh, right, okay, well, we haven't actually agreed that this behaviour is going to be like this, or that this person is going to show up in this way. So there are some things often in organisations where that might be implied. It might be about organisations' values. So that's not on there, but I guess it relates to a standard, a performance, or a behaviour. That might be walking and talking the organisation's values. It might be a specific goal or deliverable, or a product or a service. So we're thinking about the feedback then is something that's helpful, that gets people on track or back on track, or confirming that they are on track already. So just that clarity around what feedback is, I think, is helpful to be reminded of. If we're noticing somebody isn't performing in a way that we would like them to perform, but there's never been a conversation about that expectation, it makes it hard to give feedback. So that is perhaps in those situations a place to start. So when is it not feedback? We've got some thoughts here. If you haven't agreed on an expectation or behaviour or some kind of standard around the performance, then it's probably not feedback, but you can give your input. So for example, if I share a document and I say, I want to know what people think of this, I'm asking for people's ideas, I'm asking for people's input. And that's a bit different to giving someone feedback around their performance. If there isn't a goal, if that target isn't in play, you know, it's all very well saying we want to send a rocket into space, but if we're trying to land it on the moon, we need to know that the goal is to land it on the moon, and probably roughly where. So if we haven't got that agreement, then we're sharing our ideas and our opinions, and I think that's most often helpful when it's requested, but otherwise perhaps not. It might be an opportunity for coaching instead. That would depend on the situation. And again, that's like a really good management skill to be developing. If what you're saying is negative or destructive, then we want to question the why behind that. Phrases like, oh, you never do this, or you always do that, are very personal, and they're less around reaching an objective. It's much more personally directed at someone in a negative way. So we want to try and move away from that. So I'm inviting those of you, there's 100 of you now on the call, I'm inviting you to think about the best and the worst feedback that you have received. So not given, this is feedback that's been given to you. We don't need to know what the feedback was specifically. I think that's really important to state. But what made it so good? And for the worst feedback, what made it so bad? What about maybe the delivery or the content felt really good? What felt bad? So I'm going to ask you to head to the chat and ideally to share your thoughts on both of those. We won't read out any names. We're just looking to get your thoughts on what made the feedback good or what made it bad. I'm going to give you a few moments to share your thoughts there.
Hayley, we had a really nice comment while you were talking just before. Interesting to contrast feedback with input. Had never thought about that.
Yeah. Yeah, because I guess input, both I guess are quite subjective. But yeah, it's about what the goal is and helping us to get to the goal. Yeah.
Lots of people sharing some really good examples. It was specific, delivered kindly.
Kindly is interesting. So Graham, who's the founder at Think Productive, has recently published a book called Kind, all about the importance of kindness at work. So yes, that stands out as being particularly important for us.
And this is really important as well when someone's here talking about their and maybe a negative feedback experience. They weren't given any suggestion about how to make it better.
Yes, yes.
And there's so much popping up, Hayley.
And this is something we all have experience
Yeah.
of, right? Both the good and the not so good, I imagine. That comment that you just read out reminded me of my son's school report, which he had this week. It just had a colour to tell you if you're where you're at or not, but no feedback about what you need to do to get there. Unspecific was the worst. It was generalized. Didn't give me anything to grow on. It's about me as a person, not my work or performance. Yeah. I've just seen one that came through that's like not thought out. It was just words that were all jumbled up. That suggests to me a lack of confidence in someone giving that feedback, but it obviously hasn't landed well because there's no clarity on what needs to be done.
And this is interesting. It was unexpected. And that's true. Like, we try at Think Productive to say no surprises. Like, we don't save up feedback along the way for performance reviews and things.
Yes.
Feedback should never be unexpected, unless it's, positive feedback, and then that's a nice surprise. But and then also felt that the reflection was about their style, not linked to performance.
Yeah,
Which
that's really important.
feels,
Yeah, because people have different styles and that's okay. We need to kind of be okay with that. Yeah.
I think we've got a lot of people have had an opportunity to share.
Yes, and I'm seeing the word frustration and frustrated a lot.
Yeah.
Like it was frustrating when it wasn't clear, concise, etc. Yeah. So we all have experiences of the feedback, and in the longer version of this workshop, we might, in smaller groups, go into a bit more detail about, can we even remember what the feedback was? And one of the things I've noticed that people tend to remember the positive feedback and what made it feel good. But often for the worst feedback experiences people have had, they don't remember the actual feedback itself, but they remember how they felt, that frustration, that it feels unreasonable, there's nothing I can do with this. So those frustrations around the experience and perhaps the process that people have been through is what stays with them. And that's not what we want when we're giving feedback, right? I'm sure none of you here are going to be giving feedback that would later be described in this way. So when we're thinking about the intent behind our feedback, one of the keys to great experiences is to receive it graciously and to be able to give it kindly. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable to receive feedback, both positive and negative. Yeah, but often people feel uncomfortable receiving a compliment or being told that they've done a good job. So the importance of receiving it graciously and being able to give it kindly, whether it's you're on track feedback or we need to make some adjustments to get on track. They can both be done kindly. And that's one of the things we want to focus on when you're initiating perhaps those conversations. We can do that in a kind way. And the name of our feedback session in our management programs and in our in-house workshops is like, we need to talk. That sense of there needs to be a conversation, but if somebody says to you, look, we need to talk, that might fill people with a sense of dread and a sense of unease that they're going to be on the receiving end of something that they may or may not want to hear, that ambiguity, that uncertainty. So when we receive feedback, that can be a mechanism for our lizard brain, our amygdala, the part of the brain that's responsible for the fight, flight, freeze and fawn responses to kick in. Our amygdala doesn't want us to stand out for any particular reason, particularly not a reason that's like you're not on track, things aren't going well. So we can kick into overdrive. I'm sure people have heard of the feedback sandwich, the theory where you give some positive feedback, then you say, yeah, this is the thing that needs to be improved, and then you give some more positive feedback. But those messages get jumbled up and people only ever remember the negative. So we want to try and separate those out, make them separate conversations. Don't try and wedge some developmental feedback, some you're not on track at the moment feedback in amongst something else. It just makes it feel messy. Recognizing when somebody's having that conversation with us about feedback, that the natural reaction, I think, can be to be defensive, to try to justify, try to prove yourself. One of the things we talk about, I think, productive is to improve rather than prove. So we want to hear the feedback in order to improve rather than to try and prove and justify ourselves. And somebody said earlier in the chat, like, think of feedback as a gift. That's exactly what we want to encourage you to do. It's a gift. You can choose what you do with the gift, but let's think of that as somebody is trying to offer some feedback to us to help us get on track or to stay on track. So deep breath. That calms down our nervous system when we're receiving that feedback and giving it, because giving it can be hard too, but I'm talking specifically at the moment about receiving the feedback. And manage your self-talk. Like, if somebody's giving some feedback and they're letting you know that there's an area of your life or your work where you're not quite on track, that doesn't mean that they dislike you or that you're doing a bad job overall. It means they're trying to help you. They're having a conversation with you about how to get back on track. If you're on track already, like, recognizing that and thanking somebody and receiving that feedback graciously is really important. But remembering it's a gift. And there are a number of different things we can do when someone gives us a gift, right? We can take that gift, we can use it every day for the rest of our lives if it's that kind of gift, and we can use that gift and it's appreciated and valued and we welcome it into our lives. There might be other gifts where we say, oh, well, you know, I was always taught as a child, smile, say thank you, and we can send it to the charity shop if you don't like it. Somebody else, and I was having a conversation with a friend about this recently, who said, well, actually, if I receive a gift that I don't like, I will let someone know very kindly, very gently, but to say, actually, I don't know, a top with lots of bows and frilly lace isn't really my thing. I'm not sure that I'll wear that. Could we change it for something else? So how you respond to that feedback is up to you, but it's a gift, and recognizing that there's good intent behind any gift. So how we want to approach that conversation is to listen to how that feedback is given, listen to what the person's saying, and especially if you don't agree with the feedback or if you're not really clear on what the feedback is. I want to really encourage you to ask questions. So that feedback is a beginning of a two-way conversation, not somebody saying, here's this feedback, there's that gift, I'm leaving it with you now. But for you to say, okay, well, this big black box, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with this feedback. How does it work? How does it operate? What do I do with it? So that becomes a conversation where you're doing more listening and asking questions than you are trying to explain or prove yourself. I think it's important to always say thank you, even if you don't agree with the feedback. It might be that you're given some feedback and you're like, I'm not too sure what to do with that. Maybe that's part of the conversation. I remember some years ago receiving some feedback in a workshop where somebody said I was too quiet, they couldn't hear me. And I was really surprised by that feedback. And I shared it with my family, who were even more surprised by that feedback. So I decided, well, I'm not sure that that's the thing. Nobody else has mentioned it. I've been delivering training for quite a long time. I decided not to do anything with that feedback. It made me more aware when I was speaking in a bigger room to check that people at the back could hear me. And then a year or so later, I received some similar feedback about somebody not being able to hear me in a bigger room. And I was like, well, I've had that feedback twice now. My job is about making myself clear and understood. So I went and worked with a voice coach to work on projecting my voice. If I'd have just received that feedback once, I possibly wouldn't have done that. But having seen the same feedback twice, there's definitely something here now then. And something that I need to take action on. So we're always saying thank you. We're looking to reflect, we're looking to learn and think, what do I do with this feedback? And I really want to encourage you, especially if you don't agree with the feedback, to be able to ask questions. Someone giving you the feedback is a conversation starter rather than the end of the discussion. So it's for you to evaluate what you've heard and make a decision about what, if anything, you want to do with that feedback. In terms of giving feedback, there's a model that I would like to introduce you to. If we had more time, we'd go into depth in each of these areas, but I want to just give you an overview because I hope that it will help you in the next feedback conversation that you're having. So the first stage is to describe the situation. What's happening? What's not happening? When and where did this happen? To give somebody some background, some context as to what the conversation is going to be about and where that rocket is going. What are we talking about here? Then we're going to explain the feedback, explaining what it is that we would like to discuss. Maybe it relates to a behaviour, maybe it relates to a company value that's not being lived and breathed. One of the things I often hear people struggling with is over-explaining and justifying what they're saying and their feedback. Let's keep it simple. Let's be direct. Let's describe the situation. This is when and where this happened. This is my feedback. Remember, this is the start of a conversation. You're not expected to do a 20-minute monologue to make that the focus of the discussion. Then the next thing to do is to explain the impact. Well, this behaviour is taking the rocket way past the moon and we need to land on the moon. So if we carry on the trajectory we're on, we're not going to land where we need to. So I want to explain the impact. What difference is that making, either for you, the wider team, your clients or your customers? Who's being impacted and how? Then we can go into a discussion. You might ask someone, what do you think? Have you had this feedback before? We're inviting the person who's receiving the feedback to ask questions. So now we're into a two-way conversation. And that's really important, that it's not just, I'm delivering this, I'm leaving this gift on your doorstep, and now I'm running away. Right? I'm staying while you open the gift. I'm figuring out with you how to use this gift, if it's going to be something that's going to be helpful in developing you and moving you forward. as that conversation and conclusion is coming to an end, you might restate the feedback. So you're beginning to wrap that up. Okay, we've discussed the feedback. We've agreed that this bit, you're feeling that this bit is valid, and we're going to do something to get back onto that trajectory to land our rocket on the moon. And then you're going to summarize any actions, timescales, if that's relevant. The person might say, well, that's all very well that you're telling me that I haven't done this right, but nobody told me it was supposed to be done that way. I need a bit more training. I need to understand more. It might be something else. So we want to summarize what we've agreed, perhaps what we haven't agreed, and what any next actions are, so that we're wrapping that conversation up in a way that's really clear what the actions might be. And it may be, if this feedback hasn't landed well, particularly, that somebody might need a little bit of time to have a think about that. They might want to say, okay, well, I've put this on your radar. We've had a discussion. We're not necessarily 100% in agreement. You've asked for a bit of time to digest the feedback and to come back together. So that's what we're going to do. Perfectly valid response. Not for all situations, but for some of them. I'm wondering if we've got many questions. I mean, we can be turning to questions shortly.
We haven't got any questions come through the Q&A
Okay.
as yet, but maybe this is a good time if people are thinking about any questions they have and they want a few minutes to just type them out. You can put them in the chat or the Q&A, but it might be a really good time to mention that in the 3-hour We Need to Talk session, the group of leaders will get time to really explore that model in a lot of detail. They get to practice, they get to think of a scenario that they want to go away at the end of the session and use. And what's really lovely is if that workshop is paired with one of our impact clinics. So maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, we have that 1-hour follow-up clinic where everyone can then come back and share and say, right, this is the feedback I planned. And this is, I delivered it using the model, and this is how it went. Because it's such an important skill for leaders, especially new and aspiring leaders. So that's certainly something that we're seeing more and more when professionals are coming to us and saying we need help.
Definitely. And I can think of a session that I did earlier this year where we did the 3-hour We Need to Talk session, and we did an impact clinic a few weeks later. And a couple of the delegates had sent me some quite detailed thoughts. This is the conversation that was had. It opened up this whole can of worms in one situation, like, how do I respond? What do I do? So we were able to kind of coach someone through that and think about what the best approach would be, because that are you on track, are you not on track feedback had opened up a whole load of detail, I guess, and explanation maybe as to why this had happened.
I've also popped in the chat. I've popped in the chat 2 links: a link to our We Need to Talk workshop and a link to our Delegate Like a Productivity Ninja. They're my favorite pairing. I always say, if you're really looking to develop your leaders, start with the delegate. So people can, in that workshop, learn how to get people on the right flight path, set them up with really clear expectations of what you're asking them to do. And then a few weeks later, get those same leaders doing We Need to Talk, because that's the course correction when they've gone off their flight path.
Absolutely.
So anyone, if you're watching this back on YouTube and you've obviously not got a link to the chat, both of those workshops are on our website. We've also had a really nice, funny comment. Someone saying they're going to try those steps with their teenager.
Oh, would love a progress update on that. And I can see a couple of questions in the chat. If you're able to put your questions in the Q&A, it just helps us pull out the questions from the observations. But one of the questions there is quite specific. What happens if the person panics and then lies? They're blaming someone else or saying they didn't know. And I think that's difficult if you feel that you're not being told the truth. And again, we can feed that back quite clearly and directly and explain why you believe that. If it's just a hunch or an instinct, then I don't know, I probably wouldn't throw that out there. But if you know, if you've got some evidence, then that's part of the conversation, because the conversation is about course correcting to get to the same place.
Yeah.
So it might be that somebody panics, and it's the word panic is interesting. If somebody's panicking and they're finding that conversation difficult, you can acknowledge that. You can say, look, yeah, it seems like this is a difficult conversation, or you're not finding this too difficult. What do you need? A friend of mine applied for a job, and she got through several rounds, did lots of interviews for this job. And then she was contacted and someone said to her, you didn't get the job and I'm going to give you some feedback now. But she wasn't in the headspace to be able to respond to that feedback. She'd just been told she didn't have the job that she'd put a lot of time and effort into trying to get. So she said she couldn't take that feedback fully on board. So it might be better if someone's panicking or responding badly to just acknowledge that and find out what might be a better approach for them. Okay, I can see we've got a couple of questions coming through. And there's a question around the steps with regards to giving guidance on getting back on track. Should this be given during the feedback step or during the discussion step? I think in the feedback step one is you're very much saying, right, this is when and where, this is what I've noticed, this is what I've observed. You go into that discussion and you give someone the feedback. But what to do next, you always want to be able to give the person that you're giving the feedback to an opportunity to come up with their own ideas, rather than you say, this is the feedback and this is what I want you to do about it. You may say, this is the feedback, what are we going to do about it? So you're in that with the person, you're figuring out a solution together. Particularly if this is the first conversation. If it's a conversation about the same piece of feedback that's being repeated, then you may need to take a different approach. But for early steps, let's make that part of the conversation and discussion. Okay, let's head to the Q&A. Any that are standing out for you, Dee, that we should take first?
Yeah, there's a couple that are kind of asking the same thing, a
Okay.
kind of essentially, how do you help people when they come defensive? Or someone else said, yeah, difficult or defensive is in two of the questions, or
Yeah.
when someone only sees the negative.
So it's important to recognise some of this is about culture. Right? If feedback is just saved up for when things go wrong, big things, then people are going to find it more difficult perhaps to handle. So encouraging you to have regular conversations about whether people are on the right track or not. Are you on the right trajectory? Are you not? That helps to make it a bit easier to receive the feedback. They've had some practice. They're flexing their giving, or you're flexing your giving or your receiving muscles for feedback on a regular basis. So that's the first thing. I think if people are responding in a negative and a defensive way, my approach would probably be to just acknowledge that and say, you're sounding quite defensive about this, but I'm bringing it up to try and help us overcome this problem and get back on track towards this thing, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. So you're going back to the purpose, which makes it less personalized. You can notice, you can observe, and maybe even say, like, you seem quite defensive. I'm not trying to have a go at you. I'm sharing this because, and that's why it's useful in that model to share the impact. Right? I'm not having a go at you and sharing this because I feel like being nasty today. I'm sharing it with you because this is the impact it's having on the team. Now, you're giving them a gift of feedback. What they do with that gift, you have less control over. But if you're able to articulate the impact, that will help someone in terms of how they deal with it. The conversation where somebody is not responding well to your feedback might move away from the feedback. They may say, well, I feel like you're always having a go at me. And that, as I said earlier, we don't want to use those phrases like you're always. And so it might be that there's something there around the working relationship that needs to be addressed before you can really get back into the feedback. If possible, you want to direct it back into that feedback, that course correction. It might be that there's feedback there for you to listen to as well. Yeah, so it can be a two-way conversation.
Hayley, we've got a question that's kind of the other end of it. So on
Yeah.
one hand, you've got the kind of defensive, but we've got someone asking, what happens when you're giving feedback and you just feel that they're just agreeing with everything you're saying? Maybe they just want to end it sooner, or their heart's not in it, but they're kind
Yeah,
of just
that's tricky, isn't
agreeing.
it? And I talked earlier about the amygdala, the part of the brain that's responsible for the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses. The fawn response is very much just agree, get the conversation over and done with. Let's just move on. This is too uncomfortable. I don't feel safe in this space having this conversation. The conversation and the discussion there, moving it into, okay, so what are we going to do? So it's not about the conversation, is this feedback valid or not? Find out, does the person feel it's valid? If they feel it's not valid, what do you, as the person giving them the feedback, need to see? Do you need to say, okay, well, maybe this was a one-off, but let's come back to this. Let's monitor that in the future. Maybe there are some actions that you do need them to take. And you might ask them what those actions are. And that's part of the discussion. Remember, it's a two-way conversation.
We've got a nice comment in the chat that says you should always have good feedback on a regular basis. And I'm not
Yes.
sure if the good feedback means like good as in effective or good as in positive, but I'm going to take it as positive. One
Or
of
both.
our, yeah, or both. One of our ninjas, the productivity ninjas, Tess, she likes to talk about the idea of it being like a bank account where you have to make deposits really regularly so that you've got enough when you make a withdrawal. And I really like that metaphor. So the idea is that you give genuine, authentic,
Yes.
positive feedback over time, so that when you have to make a withdrawal for that person, metaphorically, and you have to perhaps give them something that's a bit more constructive, they know that you've already deposited so much positivity that you're building that relationship and that culture.
Yes, that's I love that. I'm thinking about that as a bank account is really interesting. In her book, Dare to Lead, Brené Brown talks
Yeah.
about marbles in a jar, thinking like you're putting marbles in someone's jar and you can afford to take a few out if you've got some in. And thinking of it as well as a partnership. It's not you're going to someone and telling them there's a problem and leaving them to deal with that problem. You're going to them, you're letting them know that things aren't on track. And between you, together, you're coming up with a plan to help get it back on track.
Yeah, it's years and years ago when like the first leadership training course I ever done, I was taught the feedback sandwich,
Oh,
like
yeah.
say something positive, then not so positive, then positive again. And it just felt so sticky and
Yeah,
uncomfortable.
it is.
Whereas the idea of the marbles or the bank account just feels much more authentic.
I'm very much thinking about how you create that feedback culture within a team
Mm.
where it doesn't have to be the line manager giving feedback to somebody that they supervise every time, but people feel able and confident to be able to give each other feedback because everybody's clear on what's the goal, where are we trying to land the rocket, what's the right trajectory that we need to be on. And when you've got that, it really does make it easier to give that feedback because it feels less personal, it feels less subjective.
There's a nice question about psychological safety. Hints and tips. How do you use this model in a workplace where that psychological safety perhaps hasn't been established? And I think the marbles can help with that.
Yes, yes,
Um,
definitely.
but anything to add?
Yeah, I think the marbles is a really important part of that. And as a leader, asking for feedback as well. It's not just you're doling this feedback out, but asking other people to share their feedback with you. And if you're not sure how to do that, or people aren't sure what to say, the model we use at Think Productive is we will often ask each other for, what can I stop doing? What can I start doing? What can I continue to do? So you get into the habit of giving and receiving that feedback more often. That helps build up the stack of marbles, which makes it easier to start doing that and thinking about ways in which you can create the space. Very often people are just busy and they don't have time to give each other feedback. But everybody knows that this person over there isn't so good at X, Y, or Z, and this person over here is struggling with something else. So creating a space within the team to safely give feedback and to do that in a...
Sorry, I've just seen another question. I got overexcited.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's cool.
So this question says, what advice can you give if you're on the receiving end of feedback, but essentially they're not doing it well? Like they're not using the model and you're getting this feedback and you almost need to give them feedback on how they're giving you feedback.
Yeah.
But you're supposed to be the one receiving the feedback.
Yeah, that is a tough place to be at, isn't it? In that situation, I would ask questions. I would say, what I'm hearing is that, you're not happy with X, Y, and Z, but what can we do to improve? What are your expectations? Or maybe even, I'm not clear on what the feedback is. What are the areas that aren't on track? So you can ask some questions, almost using the model perhaps. When and where have you seen this? Can you explain just very briefly what the feedback is? What are the consequences? So you're maybe taking someone through those questions yourself, perhaps. I think that is helpful. And if the feedback isn't clear, just being honest and saying, I'm not clear on what it is. I'm getting the impression here that the behaviours that you're seeing aren't what you want to see, and that I'm not on track with something. What is it that I'm not on track with? So yeah, and they're hard conversations to have, right? Because you want the person giving you the feedback to be competent at doing that, but this is something people find really, really hard.
Hayley, we've got another 3 minutes left.
Cool.
It's gone really quickly today.
It has, it definitely has. I've just seen a question in the chat as well. We'll come back to that if we have time. There are a couple of other things that we want to let you know about as well before you disappear. So we offer this session as a 3-hour in-house workshop individually. We also offer the session We Need to Talk as part of our leadership and management programs. If you're looking to build a program, it's one of the options that you can include. So some details there. You can use the QR code to find out a bit more about the session. We go in much more depth into all of those things that we've talked about today, but particularly the model. At the end of the session, people will have had some conversations in a group about planning who and when and where they need to give feedback to and about what, and perhaps some coaching as part of the group, if that's helpful. We also have coming up on the 8th of January, and I can't believe we're now talking about things in 2025, our Emotional Intelligence for People Professionals session, boosting self-awareness and workplace success. And that's part of this series, so there's no charge for that session. And you can find out all the details about that on our website. I'm Hayley Watts. I'm one of the Think Productive Productivity Ninja team, delivering this session in-house for you. If you're interested in finding out more about that, you can contact myself or get in touch with Diane. She's our Learning Success Manager, and we'll be able to talk you through all the details and ins and outs of the workshop, or how it works as part of a wider leadership and management program, if that's something that you're interested in.